So as I mentioned, I'm co-founder of the Cyberdelics Society, where we're looking at all sorts of different technologies, making our own as well as running incubators around the world, where we look at all the local facilitation of such technologies. Second thing I'm co-founder of in London is the Psychonautics Club, where we're focused on more the sort of psychotechnologies, looking at all sorts of things that don't involve necessarily psychedelics or technology, but everything else. So my general sort of average sort of activities that I'm focused on at the moment is generating those cyberdelics, running incubators, doing a lot of trials. So I'm involved with the imperial trials at on the LSD study, the DMT study, and now I'm looking at actually helping out with the protocols for creating a field study on 5-MeO-DMT. Very much interested in Moistmedia, and we're going to talk about that. So the idea of mixing your technologies with your entheogens and your psychedelics. And then looking very much at like the focus of like what's going on with technology, and a lot of people are trying to escape. So we can see hikikomori in Japan, for instance, 500,000 people in Japan trying to log out of society entirely and live in sort of very hermit-like settings. And then I'm going to talk about like this idea of, you know, there's lots of technologies that give you a sense of non-duality. There's lots of entheogens that give you a non-dual sense. But is that where we want to be focusing? Or do we want to look at beyond non-duality, if there is such a thing, to plurality, which is unity and diversity, especially in neurodiversity? And then another activity is preparing technologies to help with those studies. So how do we prepare somebody for a psychedelic experience with the technology, and how do we help them integrate those experiences? And I'm really interested in also in this idea of when you give somebody a drug, there's almost certainly side effects to that drug. So how do you give them the antidote at the same time as the drug? So, you know, what are the side effects, and what maybe foods could you take, or you know, supplements you can take to combat those side effects? So I've already gone through this, but I'll go through it again. So 3 parts. We're going to explore those differences between all those different movements, and I'm going to focus on double consciousness, and I'll explain what that is with a number of examples. So we're going to look at living in VR. We're going to look at living in hyperspace. So what does it mean to constantly be on a drip and take DMT? I'm actually going to be one of the first people to try that experience at Imperial. And you know, they're going to increase from a 10-minute experience to a 40-minute experience, and then a 4-hour experience, and then a 4-day experience. So Andrew Gallimore did a brilliant talk at Breaking Convention where he says that actually you could permanently exit 3-dimensional space and enter hyperspace. And then also very interested in technologies that enable lucid dreaming. And if you can tell me if any of you have had a lucid dream, just raise your hand. So not many of you. And even if you do have some, you don't tend to have them very often. But what if technologies could give us reliable lucid dream states? What would change? What would change to everything if we could live in our lucid dreams? Also looking specifically at light technology and sound technology. I've got a load of examples for all of these things. And then we're going to finish with some ethics and best practices. So Cyberdelics. Cyberdelics is kind of looking at the fusion of cyberculture with psychedelic subculture, the kind of scene that was around in the 80s and 90s. And cyberdelics are dependent on immersion in cyberspace. So we're going to talk about the difference between technodelics and cyberdelics. But yeah, technodelics, a recent manifesto launched by Robin. So technodelics are simply anything that can cause altered states of consciousness solely by means of external stimulation. And psychedelics, obviously you take the psychedelic, and that's working on the internal mechanisms. So I've got a longer, there's a description in the video there, but I'm going to show you, just going to talk you through it here because I think this is a nice breakdown. So the 2 major variables to any human experience are the sensor motor data we receive from the outside world, and two, how our brain processes and perceives that. So psychedelics work primarily by distorting what the brain is doing. So you and I could both be in the same room looking at the same painting, seeing completely different things if we were under the influence of psychedelics, because our brain is being distorted and our brain is then giving us a different world to everyone else. Technodelics, on the other hand, focus on the other side of the equation, what's coming in, the inputs. So technodelics are simply anything that can cause altered states of consciousness solely by means of external stimulation. Psychedelic experiences happen because of something changing within. So there's the manifesto I've mentioned, definitely check it out. I think that there's always a big backlash with these things. We see, for instance, here, David Luke mentioning that the drugs of the future will be computers. The computers of the future will be drugs. He's quoting the manifesto. Yeah, but this manifesto barely ascends to the basics, i.e. 3D geometry and artificial synesthesia, let alone transcends them. My argument always is that we're not trying to replicate psychedelics. At least I'm not trying to in the work I do, because why would you? Why would you bother? I mean, it's like they already exist. I think that you could argue that legality stops people taking psychedelics, and if we're wanting to democratize the psychedelic experience for people that either are too scared to lose control, or they're too scared of the legality issue, then yeah, we could find some alternatives. But for me, it's a case of let's create something that's novel, that's a mix, it's a blend, it's something in addition to the psychedelics. And here my co-founder Jose from the Cyberdelics Society, he explains a little bit more about the differences between the cyberdelics and the technodelics. So cyberdelics are tools or techniques dependent on cyberspace as a means to catalyze altered states of consciousness, making it by default codependent on computers and electrical power, whereas technodelics are not dependent on electricity. They can be analog in the sense that it can be a piece of art. You know, technodelics have been around since cavemen times. It's all about what stimulus is coming in to actually change your perception. So holotropic breathwork could also be called a technodelic. This is a really interesting example from David, who mentioned that the merry pranksters on the further bus pictured used novel multimedia technology, which was microphones on the outside of the bus being fed into the bus and going through tape loops to create and stimulate a cyberdelic experience. So, you know, they created altered states even when you weren't on LSD. So Moistmedia for me is where it gets super interesting and where new science is opening up, which is what this conference is all about, is the intersection between the technology, the dryware and the wetware, your biology. It's a term Roy Ascott came up with. And there's a great, for your reference, there's a great group called Rift into the Mind on Oculus. Basically it's a Reddit group, and they're looking at different VR experiences combined with different drug types. A lot of the time we're seeing ketamine as a really amazing combination with VR, because obviously you're disassociating and therefore you become part of the virtual space very much more easily. So that's the term. A nice example recently was this one, where people are using VR with ketamine for therapy. One of my favorite pieces of cyberdelics, soon to become Moistmedia, is a piece called Isness from David Glowacki. And Isness is designed to explore how this physics engine that they've built at Bristol University can be adapted to enable participants to experience the energetic essence of matter and elicit perceptual responses comparable to psychedelic experiences. There's a brilliant paper on this that's just come out, and they're comparing their experience to psychedelics, and they've got some fantastic results and very much comparable. And what's really interesting about it is that you use gloves, so you do the mudra in virtual space, and you're connecting your thumb with your forefinger. And when you do that in the virtual space, you create light. So all you see is light, these 2 points of light, and you're in the space with 3 others. And you can see them as 2 points of light as well. And when everyone's connected their mudras, then the whole space lights up with the physics engine showing you what you look like in terms of energy. So it's a super interesting cyberdelic, and one of my favorites. And what's interesting now is that they want to combine this experience with psychedelics. So they're wanting to take small doses of mushrooms, magic mushroom, psilocybin, and try the experience to see what benefits that has. And initially it was launched at Breaking Convention, and yeah, a lot of people were told that they couldn't be on a substance because it would interfere with their data collection, and now they're saying actually you can try it. So the next area is technomancy, and yeah, really interested in this one as well because it's combining magic with technology. So mancy is divination. And for examples of technomancy would be charging your sigils. I don't know how many of you know about sigils. That might be a good question and conversation in the next break. Charging your sigils with Twitter, or using tarot programs or runestone programs rather than traditional methods. A lot of people would say that this is a bastardization, and you know, they may have a point. Psychotechnologies are different again. John Vavaki's term, psychotechnologies. When we think about a technology, what usually comes to mind are electronic computers and other digital devices. So again, this is similar to the technodelics because they're saying, you know, things like meditation are also technologies. It's a psychotechnology. And this is something I've come up with recently with a lot of hindsight about the work that we've done with the Cyberdelics Society, is that all of these areas are sort of, it's many ways up the mountain, but the views are the same at the top. But what I think is that the magic is in the combinations, and Holotechnica is about the two terms. So holo is to combine into the whole, and technica is technique. So when you're combining different techniques to create these recipes. So we heard from Jamie Will earlier about the power of combinations, and I think this is an absolute citizen science explosion where we really need a lot of different inputs. We need to crowdsource this research because, you know, there's just so much that's going on that is not recorded, and we can't expect everything to be recorded in a clinical setting. So it's about doing your own field studies and reporting back. And I got this inspiration from listening to Matthew Clark at Breaking Convention, where he mentioned Soma, the substance that was almost certainly ayahuasca based, actually consisted of 100 different plants. And depending on where you were in India, you would use different combinations. So, you know, I think that's a really interesting insight that this stuff has been going on, and these combinations lead to magic. So when I say this Holotechnica idea, so it's combining psychedelics with technologies like we're focused on in this conference, but also body work, things like remote viewing, sensory deprivation, martial arts, music, all that kind of stuff. So there's many different types of meditation. There's many different types of dance. And then if you're combining that with you're doing your keto, your fasting, you know, then everything else in the stack is going to change. If you're fasting, everything else in the stack is going to change if you're in a darkness space, or if you're in cold, you know, if you're in an immersion of cold water. So, you know, it's very much about the context and the perceptual changes that result from those contextual changes. And brilliant stuff from Jamie as always. I think that looking at the different systems and turning this into a science is absolutely right. As he says, consciousness is programmable. We know that as a fact, but the question is, what are we going to do with it? And I think that that's the kind of focus that I have on with my work. What are we going to do with this fact? And I know all the consciousness hacking guys are questioning the same thing. And we want to see, you know, changes to our societies, especially now. And this just reiterates what I was saying earlier about this, the stacking. If it's just single interventions, it has a certain benefit, but if you're combining these things, so breathing, embodiment, music, sexuality, substances, you have a much greater impact in terms of that transformation. So my first little clip, this is Aldous Huxley. Let me know if you can hear the sound in a second.
Some strange kind of thing. Halfway house between oneself and something else. Would you like to take the I think I should. Even if I went somewhere completely different, would that be good? No. No. Yes, but it doesn't solve the problem of having to be completely oneself, completely something else. It is like the whole secret of the book.
So I really like this from Huxley, whilst tripping on acid, was such a great insight that to be in one place and another place at the same time is the secret to life. And we all know that the reason why we're attracted to these entheogens and psychedelics and all sorts of other mechanisms for escape is because we need to take regular holidays from our default mode networks. So another quote from Roy Ascott: the state of being which gives access at one and the same time to two distinctly different fields of experience, the shamanic trance in which the shaman is both in the everyday world and at the same time navigating the outermost limits of other worlds, is arguably now mirrored by our ability to move through the infinities of cyberspace whilst within the structures of the material world. This techno-shamanism may lead to an evolution of cognition where the subject-object relationship is dissolved and reality begins to be actively constructed rather than passively observed. And I think that's a brilliant definition of what double consciousness is, and it inspired me to look for other examples. So this is the typical sort of shamanic sense of, you know, accessing the astral whilst in the physical. We know dreaming is a great example of double consciousness. And, you know, I'm really interested in these, you know, we're in different light bodies. And I'm fascinated by the fact that this is mirrored with the entheogens, and we'll get onto that later on. At work, we built a holoportal, which enabled us to turn matter into light. So we're creating holograms for the Microsoft HoloLens. And again, you know, these technologies are mirroring what's going on with the medicines. Some of my friends at Field.io cottoned onto this as well. So in virtual reality, you're in two places at once, right? So they realized the Oculus or whatever is a very ugly piece of technology. So they started making these sorts of much more elaborate performative headsets where, because you are moving in a physical space, you're not aware of it so much, but you are obviously moving around in a space, in the virtual space, but also in the physical space. So this is about you as performer in both spaces at the same time. And other examples of double consciousness, this is a mushroom ear. This is a cloud tree. This is a pig trying to escape a tree. These are actually look like cassette tapes, but these are buses on the way to Mecca, pilgrims. This actually looks like concrete, but it's New Delhi from above. This is a man dressed as a tree. This is a baby weasel riding a woodpecker. It looks quite idyllic, but actually the weasel is attacking that woodpecker, and you can probably tell from the look on its face. This is a brilliant piece of work from my friend Roger over in Melbourne, who actually made a copy of his DMT entity, and then he superimposed that entity over on top of himself. So it's this sort of idea where you're combining to make something new. In this instance, butterfly and a toad, or this where a man with no legs and a man with no arms are riding a bike, and they couldn't do it without each other. More sinister examples of double consciousness. This one's a bit of a joke, but a hermit crab using a human skull as a shell. And this one, very real example of double consciousness, a mother listening to her dead son's heartbeat inside a 4-year-old's transplant recipient. And one of my favorite examples recently was this one from Andy Letcher, and Lauren Fields, Joshua's sister, started a brilliant podcast recently. And yeah, this is, let me just read this to you. So yeah, I'm quadriceps. I don't know how many of you have heard of cordyceps, rather. I don't know if you've heard of this. It's a fungus which infects species of ants in the rainforest and insinuates itself into the ant's body, all around its muscles and its legs, all around its brain, and in the ant just carries the ant just carries on doing what ants do until the moment the fungus wants to reproduce, and then the ant's behavior changes and it climbs up a tree, and chooses a very specific leaf at a specific angle, and at exactly noon clamps its jaws shut down on the leaf, where the fungus dissolves the body of the ant and grows a little mushroom out of it in order to disperse its spores across the rainforest. It's, as Andy says, the stuff of science fiction, but it's happening right now. And as Andy says, that's a lot of effort to go to for the ant to grow its, for the mushroom to grow through an ant. But what about other ways that the mushrooms are synergizing with us? Because basically you can simply manipulate our neurochemistry. So we're already in the service of these mushrooms because we've identified over 200 psilocybin producing fungi. And we've worked out how they affect our neurochemistry. We've also worked out how to cultivate them, and we've spread their spores around the world. So, but in return, they're transforming our consciousness, making us behold the world in a more mushroomy way. So for me, you can see both are forms of double consciousness, but one is actually potentially a fake form, because you could argue the ant is already a zombie as soon as it's infected, even though it seems like it's acting quite normally until the last gasp. But the second example is definitely much more, you are present in both sides of that equation. So another example, we'll have a little break for questions in a minute, but the other one I'm really interested in is that I've written a diary for 30 years, and I've written it from 3 levels. So what I did, the content, what I felt, the context, and what I thought. So I've written 5 minutes a day for 30 years, every single day of my life. And I've written it from those 3 levels. And it's super interesting because it forces me to get new material every day. It enables me to take a whole relationship that may have lasted a year, and I can read that in an afternoon, and I can basically take that and turn that relationship into a bird's eye view, and it's pure therapy because I can see patterns emerge that I would never notice in real time. I also take cross sections through that data set. So I look at this day last year and the year before and the year before, the year before and the year before, the year before, the year before, and I get 30 different me's communicating again. So my 16-year-old self with my 30-year-old self. And what my aim with this project is to feed it into an AI. So feed all of that data into an AI using natural language processing. And then I would basically have a clean data set with just the summaries of my existence. And then I could ask the AI questions that I can't answer myself, and see if it would come up with something smart. But the reason why this is a form of double consciousness is it allows me to jump out of the local point of view and into the overview. So I'm able to literally leave my my current local state, and I get into this field of view, and I get the overview effect, and it gives me a sense of perspective. It allows me to know if I'm on the right track, if I've done enough that month. And you can see this replicated in things like Facebook's On This Day, where you get a summary of everything you've done over the last 10 years if you've been on Facebook, but on that specific day. And another example of double consciousness that came up recently was this one of Buddhism being improved with virtual reality. And some interesting research, but it's a very contentious one, bringing up concerns of building dependency on VR, which are totally valid. But if I was alive 3,000 years ago, I might express the same concerns about Buddhism itself being a form of dependency. Any structure used to access the divine can become a crutch if not designed and used skillfully. And I think that's absolutely a key message for the whole of our conference. So these are comments from my friend Hannah Close. From my understanding, there's a textbook example of techno-fetishism or solutionism. If people think that they can slip on a piece of technology and break through to an awareness of God, how on earth can we expect them to do the deep work needed to transform our predicament? There appears to be an insatiable desire to keep on improving and innovating on things that are fine as they are, and it's distracting us from the real problems. The irony of it all is that much of what we need to do is just stop, and that's certainly what's happening now. Buddhism or any wisdom tradition doesn't need the allure of technology to be accessible. Our constant obsession with hacking consciousness with tech is driving us further away because we are consciousness, and our collective shadow deepens when we run with the idea that we can just hack away at ourselves to reveal our true perfect selves. It shows how insecure and neurotic our collective identity is. So a great question for the consciousness hacking community. Moving on to one of my favorite collectives in the VR space is Marshmallow Laser Feast. And I had an absolutely transformative experience with Tree Hugger, and I'm just going to show you a little clip now. So yeah, why this was so incredible was that I went into a space and there was like this rubber structure in the middle of the room, and I put on the headset and suddenly I'm in front of a ginormous redwood, and it was actually a LiDAR scan, so an accurate physical copy of the redwood. And what was great is that with that structure in the middle of the room, I could put my head inside the tree, and I was able to experience what it was like to be the water traveling through the tree. So coming up in the roots, and then as soon as the water hit the base of the tree, I started to rise off the floor and I went up in the air like the water would. And I had this out of body experience, and it was just like, wow, like this is insane. So I was like in the scale of this massive redwood, and having my first electronic out of body experience. The next one they did was called We Live in Oceans of Air at the Saatchi Gallery. And it was very much looking at the interactions, again, between oxygen and carbon dioxide. So, the carbon dioxide we breathe out, feeding the nature around us. But again, there's always these backlashes with people thinking that we're so disconnected from nature that do we need these technologies to reconnect us? These were some of the comments when I posted this. Humans build tools as extensions of themselves. I do not need claws because I can imagine a knife. Technology in and of itself is not responsible for our disconnect from nature. We are. There's a line past which, however, that the machine ceases to become a tool and rather begins to set the pace of our consciousness. And David's point, I think it's more subtle than simply blaming technology, but rather we can see that our increasing technological and consumerist addictions takes us away from nature. VR is about as denatured and unnatural as an experience as it gets. Well, I would take absolute issue with David in that sense, because these things are incredibly powerful reminders that we are nature. And the next experience Marshmallow Laserfish is going to create is this one. It's called The Tides Within Us, exploring the boundary of where this living body begins and where it ends. Our skin can appear as a boundary between self and other. By peering beneath these sensorial surfaces, we discover branching beings, ecosystems neatly packaged to move. We aim to challenge the notion of boundary between our bodies and our environment. Race and gender become transparent and deeper connections become apparent, reactivating forgotten connections between human and nature. this journey of self-discovery follows the flow of oxygen through the body. This is a bit of a world exclusive, so I don't believe this has gone out anywhere yet. So I'm going to show you a little clip of this as well. So yeah, moving on to something I tried recently, and it really made me understand the process of letting go in an embodied way. So another little clip. So I'll just kill the sound so I can tell you about it. So yeah, you're in a VR experience, you walk into this hotel and you're untethered in the experience I tried anyway. And you go into this hotel and you go up a lift, and then the lift opens, as you've seen just seconds ago. And then you're faced with this plank in the cityscape, and your brain is screaming at you, don't do it, because your brain thinks it's real, because your whole visual field is taken up by this scene. And the idea is actually to drop off and to let go off the plank. And that is a really hard thing to do, because you really feel the sensation of falling. At the bottom, you actually smash into the ground. And it made me think, Jesus, this is a brilliant practice for an entheogen like 5-MeO-DMT, which the only real price of admission for that reliable experience is letting go. But letting go is not a cognitive experience, it's very much an embodied one. And this, if you practice over and over again, would give you something that is not prescriptive. You're not trying to show somebody what a 5-MeO-DMT experience is. You're literally just giving them the tools to let go. So moving on to the next area, I'm just going to stop sharing for a second, see if you've got any questions. So yeah, anyone want to ask a question? Otherwise we'll get off to the next section, because I know I'm already like halfway in. So if you do have any questions, just shout, yeah? You can just unmute yourselves. Or just okay, so it doesn't matter if you don't have a video, just ask the question.
Can you hear me?
Unmute Menta? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess it's about the potential harms of...
Hey Menta, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I myself had an experience with an augmented reality technology last summer at a tech conference in San Francisco. And it induced ayahuasca-like states in me that was not properly communicated beforehand.
Right.
Even though I made sure to ask if there were any emotional trigger warnings or anything I should be aware of about engaging with the technology. I was assured that there were not, and that I would be fine, and that there would also be someone there holding space for me upon exit of the technology, which there was not. So a lot of it had to do with the way it was facilitated, not properly, not mindfully. But yeah, so I could share more about that experience if people are interested in it, but I guess my question is like, how do we create more accountability around widespread adoption of these types of technologies in the public sphere, when, I mean, I feel like right now a lot of them are accessible in a decentralized and open source way, and people with money have access to the equipment to facilitate these technologies, but how are we making sure that people aren't psychologically harmed by misguided or not so conscious use of the technologies?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I mean, I know from a friend of mine recently that they also went into a VR experience, and the VR experience was giving them a near-death experience. And they had done a lot of work on themselves over many years, going to lots of different therapies. And they claimed that they had, all of that work was undone in a 20-minute VR experience. So I think we have, we have to really, we have to be super aware.
And for me, if I may just share a bit more of what it actually brought up for me, it triggered some overlapping traumas that I have. One main one being having my consciousness altered without my consent on visionary plant medicine in the physical realm. So that's an experience I had that was triggered in that experience because I thought that I could trust this person, this technology, and I could not. And then on top of that, just kind of what ayahuasca medicine brings up for me around childhood and mother wounds, etc. Those two sorts of overlapping traumas were inflicted, and there was not proper space holding at all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it all comes down to ethics and actually educating people around, you know, when they're creating these VR experiences, we really, and same with psychedelic journeys, like if you're not holding space properly for someone, and a lot of our work is about utilizing the best practices of what we've learned from the psychedelic realm and applying that to the cyberdelic realm where it is relevant. So thank you so much for your question. I'm going to move on to the next bit of the slides. So let me just share my screen again. So this is Mark Farid, who's doing the Seeing Eye project. We've been working together for 5 years to get this off the ground. And in this project, he's going to wear somebody else for a month. So he's literally, oh, sorry, it's now 14 days because we thought a month was actually a bit too hardcore. But he's looking through somebody else's eyes. So instead of, you know, looking through his own eyes, he's looking through somebody else's eyes. So there's him capturing, let me show you what the actual technology.
Yeah. Ultimately, there is permission to use this picture for seeing eye practices. Indeed.
So what you're seeing there is actually the headset that we constructed over 5 years, enabling capturing of 270 degrees. So I wear this on my head, and this was actually me at my last Breaking Convention talk in 2019. Yeah, wearing that device, actually recording my day at the psychedelic conference. It just happened to be that day that I got the headset. But incredibly, you know, interesting technology, incredibly interesting concept. And Mark's looking to see if he can dissolve his own identity by adopting somebody else's for a month. And I joke that when I went, because we also had a showcase of VR experiences at the Cyberdelics Society, so I wore the headset inside the virtual reality experiences. So he was experiencing the virtual reality experiences inside a virtual reality experience. So my first sort of counter point of this stuff. So I'm gonna give you those 5 examples, and then I'm gonna counter them. So I worry for this man losing his own senses. He's experiencing sound and vision from you and others. So yeah, he doesn't have access to his own, I mean, it's by choice though. But if we think about things like Westworld, where they've made an artificial world where you can go and explore your darkest desires, which would be illegal in real life. This highly dubious area because it's such problematic narrative. One of the main arguments for designing these worlds is to get it out of your system. And they say the same about pedophiles, that they should have access to these virtual whatevers. But actually, you know, the argument is not very clever because you're still building those neural networks as if it's real. So I think that we can just as easily create trauma virtually as we can in the real world. This is some work my colleague Heather Hargreaves is involved with, which is looking at mixed reality. So augmented reality, where you're able to see your own brain activity superimposed over to the world. So I'm really interested in these feedback loops that enable us to adjust our internal spaces because we have access to that data. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that. So this is another one where we're looking at virtual reality in all sorts of different contexts. This is a very contentious one, which is actually pain management whilst pregnant, whilst giving birth. And again, very strange and disturbing for a lot of women that would be wanting to be very much present during that moment. But this is an interesting project where my friend is in persistent pain. So where does pain come from? How is it felt, imagined and imaged? Can it be remapped and consequently refelt? Can pain be reprocessed through visual language, code or models to change a person's lived experience? If you start to look at at reality as a model, it's much more likely to be negotiable. And if it's negotiable, it can change. So again, the counter argument to this stuff, VR as pain relief is potentially exciting, but mostly horrifying. The idea of wearing a headset through childbirth and medicalizing a beautiful natural process is not part of the planetary healing that we're seeking, especially with my research. It smacks of disconnect to me, and there are lots of dangerous lines in all of this which need to be carefully observed. This principle of dealing with pain by deliberately putting my attention in different places is a good one though, e.g. acupressure. So, you know, we know that there's a history of these things. We know that there's the wristband that shocks you when you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing to try and change your behavior. I mean, we're like children and using technologies to try and like change our behavior because our behavior has been changed by the technologies. One of my friends also had a terrible dream where she was in a virtual reality headset, and she was in a terrorist's body and she was experiencing all the terrible things that the terrorist was doing. And it was a new form of prison that people were being put inside. Because if you think about it, you might not need prisons anymore if you can just force somebody to wear a headset, or with Neuralink from Elon Musk, if you're actually interfacing the brain directly with your technology and it goes into the brain itself in the next 15 years. Terrifying thought. One thing that Tim Mullins showed in the breakout yesterday was this amazing experience called the Avatar Experience.
So this is the Avatar Experience, where you can, this is something we created at Infion that allows you to go inside your own brain and body in virtual reality, see your heart beating, see your own brain activity being reconstructed. The patterns of light and color are actually your own statistically inferred neural activity. All of that is in real time, providing you a feedback experience. You can travel to a part of your brain and do neurofeedback at that part of your brain, for instance, trying to change the activity there. Part of this, though, is just creating immersive environments in which you can explore your own internal state. So it's kind of an example of that.
So absolutely mind-blowing, mind-blowing stuff. And my third example is this one of DMT extended. So I don't know how many of you have tried DMT, incredibly powerful experience. Whether we would want that experience to continue or whether it's designed to be short-lived by design is another question. Andrew Gillimore quotes, "You will learn how your brain constructs your subjective world and how psychedelic drugs alter the structure of this world. How DMT switches the reality channel by allowing the brain to access information from normally hidden orthogonal dimensions of reality. And finally, you will learn how DMT provides the secret to exiting our universe permanently, to complete the cosmic game and to become interdimensional citizens of hyperspace." So he's already shown that he's got the technology, he's got the science behind it, and it's a fascinating question. One of the interesting collaborations I've got going with David Luke and my colleague Mark Ransley is, if you've done NN-DMT, you'll notice that you see extra dimensions of space. So if that's true, how do we test that? How do we measure these things? And this is always the big question when it comes to the science, is how do you measure these anecdotal experiences? So if we look at something like the HoloLens and a piece of technology called Hologram, you can actually pull into the HoloLens these hypercubes, which you could actually be trying to interface with whilst on the drug. So it's a Moistmedia example. And yeah, it's being developed at the moment. So I was very lucky to try the DMT study, to do the intravenous DMT, which is unbelievably crazy. This was the first phase, which was just EEG. This is what I saw on my experience. This is Chris Timmerman talking about the first phase. This is my brain on NN-DMT. This is me before the experience, and this is me after the experience. What I find fascinating about DMT is the persistent graphics, the persistent hieroglyphic language that I see. And I put out a post on Facebook saying, does anyone else see this persistent language that looks ancient and modern at the same time? I get what looks like a holographic circular display of it at the core of my vision throughout the experience. And then people started sending me examples of what they're seeing in this language, because it's there every time I try it. And all these examples came in, mind-blowing stuff. And that what actually was the closest was this one from Alison Gray. And yeah, just still not anywhere near as close, but the closest I've seen to what I experienced. So maybe whilst on the DMT extended journey, I will get to sit there and draw this language that I'm experiencing. That's one thing I'm really excited about. But a counter argument, again, from my friend Jack Aloka, there's a danger that the psychedelic state is being overly romanticized. DMT extended could be argued to be a new form of biochemical VR, where we are getting stuck into another Game of Thrones that is not on our screens, but inside our minds. We have to rise above everything being reduced to entertainment. Otherwise, we will become junkies of altered states that don't go anywhere. Next example, dream hacking. I already asked you about your abilities to lucid dream. But what happens when we can reliably create these lucid dream states? And a lot of this research is still very much in its early days, but they're using transcranial stimulation during REM. And this is a headset from Persinger. Not one that you'd want to wear in bed, but his God helmet enabled you to experience the presence behind, and it's using transcranial stimulation, also created out of body experiences. But they also found it was, if you apply this small amount of electricity during REM, then you create these reliable altered states, and you create reliable lucid dream states. But what does it mean if we manage to achieve that? So this is more about how it works. So yeah. And, we know that dream yoga and yoga nidra, and there's all these things that if you did, say, for instance, I've got a friend that practices Tai Chi in his lucid dream states, and he's effectively, he's saying it's 4 times more effective to practice Tai Chi in a dream state than in reality, because you have to apply gravity. You have to apply all of the environmental factors that you get given in your everyday life. So I think there's something definitely in that. But when you start combining galantamine, which is a smart drug, with those other solutions in a stack, then you can definitely say that these things will become more reliably achievable. And this is another example of using a digital solution. So that, again, this is the idea of using your own brain activity to create your visuals inside the VR space. So that's the wrong counter argument. But I wanted to just go back and say that, yeah, I mean, if one of my friends, for instance, said about that he'll go to sleep and have a dream, and it will be a dream where he's experienced a whole life in one night. And then he'll wake up and he'll write the whole dream down, and it'll take him 12 hours to write the dream. And then he'll go back to sleep and have another crazy dream where he's lived like 3 lives in one night. And then he'll come out of it. And so you just spend your whole life nested in this double consciousness, not actually living anymore, which comes back to the whole hikikomori argument. And yeah, we need to be super careful that we're not, like the Ready Player One scenario, not leaving our everyday reality to wreck and ruin because we're just launching into the virtual space from this dystopian wasteland. So on to the next section. Light technology. and different types of light. So another really great example is this from MIT, programmable synthetic hallucinations, where we're able to again use transcranial stimulation to stimulate the cells in the hypercolumns of V1 to induce a visual hallucination in front of you. So you're able to see a line of pixels of light just by stimulating the brain. So these are real synthetic hallucinations. You know, and I had this incredible out-of-body experience when I was growing up. At 27, I walked into an empty room in my friend's apartment, and I went out of body, and I literally I became this ginormous beam of light, and I was like, what the hell's just happened? Because I was standing up, and my body had gone. I was just in this space of light. It felt like I'd gone up, and I was rotating in a wheel of these beams of light. And suddenly I was in this, like, it felt ginormous, and I felt infinite power of light, of energy. And I was rotating in this wheel of light, and it was like spokes of light. And this disembodied voice said, "Oh yeah, you're having the experience of your other lives. Your soul is inhabiting 8 bodies, and you're only aware of this one that you're in, but you're inhabiting all these others. And look up, because you're also part of a larger body of light." And before I could look up, my friend starts calling my name, and as a result of that, I'm pulled back into my body, and it's like being poured back into a bottle. My consciousness being poured back in, and I literally, as I was being poured back in, I was told, "There is no death, and tell everybody." So about 10 years after that, I was reading this book and came across this diagram called the Ore Station as a Programming Center of Light. And this is exactly what I experienced. And I was like, wow, like, this is insane. And I still haven't properly researched what this Programming Center of Light is. But the fact that you can find evidence for your transformational experiences out there in the world is really, gives me a lot of hope. And I had another amazing experience where I was doing cold immersion and hot immersion, going into a cold river and coming out and going into a hot sauna. And all of a sudden I got this mixed reality experience of the flower of life being superimposed over reality. And I saw this light, you know, just completely naturally. And it blew my mind. So just moving on to this question of, you know, the difference between NN-DMT and 5-MeO-DMT. So NN-DMT, you see this incredible holographic reality, you know, like, as Andrew Gallimore says, an orthogonal reality, you know, very different to this one. And everything is made of light. It's holographic light, and it's very much colored. And yeah, it's very different to our reality, where the sun is shining on objects. In this reality, everything is luminous. It's the light is coming out of those objects. The light is what the objects are. But on 5-MeO-DMT, you become the light. So when you take the 5-MeO-DMT entheogen, from my experience anyway, as you exhale, your consciousness expands so rapidly, it just pops, and then you become everything. And you become light itself. You become the source of everything. And it's like, you know, if you think about it in terms of dimensions, it's like the pinnacle of the psychedelic or the entheogenic Christmas tree. And you're literally in the 11th dimension, the source of all. And then the NN-DMT experience is a 5th dimensional experience, where you're experiencing the spirit world, you're seeing, you know, aliens, everything else, very much content. 3rd dimension, you're experiencing light from a different perspective. So different degradations of light. And this was an interesting drawing, a sketch I made with Chris Timmerman, where at the top you've got this, you know, you becoming the light source, and then NN-DMT, everything being made of light, and then normal reality light falling on objects. And yeah, some of my other really interesting experiments have been done with holotropic breath work and Shakti mats. So looking at, you know, this idea of combining the two. I'm just going to double check my slides, because I know we're running low on time and I don't want to miss out on questions. Does anyone want to ask any questions? before I move on? And how long have we got left? Shall I just carry on? How long have we got, Trevor?
So what I heard from them was that everyone has a lunch, but you're allowed to go basically as long as you want before the next thing happens. So it's up to you.
Okay, well, I'm actually on the next thing that happens, so I need to prepare for that.
So basically, go until you feel you're ready.
All right, brilliant. I'm gonna jump back into the slides then and give you a bit more of an insight into what we're talking about. So where shall we get back to? I mean, this one's mind-blowing. If you haven't tried DIPT, DIPT is super interesting because it just changes your auditory hallucinations. So it just messes around with how you're hearing, and everything else remains the same. And I think I will go on to this one, which is incredible research from the Trans-Species Society. So everyone knows that what's it like to be a bat is a big area of research in terms of philosophy, and loads of people have philosophized about what it must be like to be a bat. And this guy, Joe, he's actually installed echolocation directly into his senses. So forget about VR, he's gone full juggernaut and now can sense what the distance of things are from behind him. And yeah, I just wanted to finish on some of the ethics and stuff, because I think a lot of these technologies that we're using completely suck us in, and they don't really give us, they might give us an altered state, but they do not give us an altered trait. And I think creating barriers of use, even between me and my smartphone, my screen smashed, and I felt completely like I had locked-in syndrome. I couldn't actually. I couldn't actually function without access to my phone. So one of my colleagues said, "Oh, you can plug a dongle into your phone and then access it with a keyboard and a mouse. So the mouse becomes the pointer where your finger would have been." And it was like, "Oh my God, I've been unlocked." So and I actually lived with this for a couple of weeks because it created a barrier of use. I mean, I would use it if it was necessary, but instead of using my phone 150 times a day, I would use it for 2 times a day because I had to faff around and plug in all this stuff just to get it to work. So this is what I mean about the fact that we're children, and we're constantly having to like counter one technology with another. And I think that's the same with substances, isn't it? Sometimes you'll take you'll get a side effect from a drug, and you'll have to take another drug in order to fix the side effects of that drug. So McLuhan warned us against too much human extension into technology and said every media extension of man is actually an amputation in another way. So poorly designed technology has the potential to bring around our arrested development. And I think that's absolutely the core of what we're all working on. Some brilliant research. This survey was given to a load of school kids, and they asked them, what would you rather give up, your sense of smell or your smartphone? And they unfortunately all chose to give up their sense of smell. Mind-blowing. And unfortunately, they probably don't realize, but if you give up your sense of smell, you also give up your sense of taste, because the two are connected, and then your sense of reality goes pretty soon after that, I suspect.
Carl, you need to share your screen.
So I think the key point is we shouldn't replace imagination with computer animation. And a lot of the stuff that I've been working on has really taught me that, you don't want to replicate an ayahuasca journey in VR space, really, because it's taking that imagination away from you. And yeah, I'm really interested in the technologies that are like, we could argue that we are dependent on technology, and we always have been, because, technology actually made us human. If we think about like, fire as a technology, the ability to cook, etc. but I think that there's good dependence and there's bad dependence, just like there is in any relationship. So, you know, the example here is that we've worked with Cyborg Nest on their NorthSense chip, which basically gives you the sensation of north. So it vibrates every time you face north. You have that new sense. You get it after a few weeks, but you wear this permanently on your chest. Whereas the feel space belt above is something you wear for 6 to 8 weeks, gives you that new sense. Vibration goes in the belt. And then sorry?
Your screen is not shared for a while now.
Shit. Let me see. That sucks. But I think, yeah, you probably would, you would have been okay with it. I'll just show you those slides so you can see them. So that was the one where I was talking about the phone. Did you see these ones from Joe? So that was the guy that was installing echolocation. This was when I started talking about best practices and ethics. So the phone being, you know, having to create barriers of use. The McLuhan slide about every technology being an extension of man, but also an amputation. And then, yeah, this was the slide about not replacing imagination with computer animation. And this was the example of the NorthSense chip and the feel space belt. So this belt gives you that new sense, but you remove it and you maintain that new sense. So, you know, for me, a hyperhumanist approach is that you wear technology for a short period of time, just like the stabilizers on your bike, and then you remove it. So you don't become dependent and you don't have brain implants, etc. I mean, here is a brain implant. This is what they're planning in the next 15 years. Imagine that. I mean, we know that every time you put something into the body, your body will try the hell to reject it. And, you know, using technology to change behavior, the Pavlok bracelet, which electrocutes you every time you pick up a cigarette or every time you sleep in or whatever. You know, good, bad, it's difficult to say. One of the more interesting ones is this one. It's called Forest, an app that enables you to, when you're not touching your phone, it grows a tree. And if the tree fully grows, a real tree is planted. And I think, you know, using technology to undo the damage caused by badly designed technology is what we need to be doing, because technology is not going away. In fact, the current situation means that we're more dependent on it than ever before. But it's about education. It's about good design. And I'm going to finish there. Thank you very much.